It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Daily Beast 400. Christopher Dickey's with us. How are you, sir?
Happy to be here.
Glad you could make it. Glad as well to welcome Elisa Rubin, Paris bureau chief for the New York Times.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for coming. Thanks as well to documentary maker Paul Moreira, director of Première Ligne, the television press agency.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. And France 24's Nadia Massi, making the trip from the second floor newsroom.
Quite a trip.
All right. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag World This Week. Amid a steady drip of gruesome allegations, a manhunt on the outskirts of Istanbul, the Belgrade Forest. One of the locations Turkish investigators are searching in the wake of the October 2nd disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist who entered his consulate in Istanbul for documents on the eve of his wedding. Now, it's just a matter of confirming his murder.
If you look at Saudi Arabia, they're an ally and they're a tremendous purchaser of not only military equipment, but other things. When I went there, they committed to purchase $450 billion worth of things and $110 billion worth of military. Those are the biggest orders in the history of this country, probably the history of the world.
Say that after the death?
All right, that was Donald Trump, who spoke a while back, a couple of weeks ago, right? Christopher Dickey, he did say that it's looking like Khashoggi's been murdered.
Yeah, he says he's dead. Well, that's a good guess. Thank you, Donald, for that. But he's still stalling. I mean, you can see Pompeo went to Riyadh. He talked to Mohammed bin Salman, King Salman, and basically he came out of there saying, let's give them some more time to do what? To investigate or to develop their cover story. Everybody thinks it's the latter. Everybody thinks it's the latter. Now, that said, I don't think we can trust everything that's coming out of Turkey, all the Turkish sources. They have their own access to grind on this, or maybe that's a poor choice of words under the circumstances. But the fact is, Jamal, who was a friend of mine, is dead. Somewhere is his body. Somewhere there may be pieces of him. And the question is, who ordered that murder? And the answer is almost certainly Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia.
All right, and we heard Donald Trump talk about perhaps rogue killers. Those were his words. Your newspaper ran a story showing several pictures of Colonel Maher Mutreb in the background with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in several occasions. It's not looking like it was rogue killers, is it?
Well, I think one would have to question whether rogue killers could actually, or rogue operators, get into the Saudi consulate, and they seem to have been on a tight schedule and with no room to spare, and that certainly it does seem unlikely. And that wasn't just Mutreb. It was I think there was a list of 15, and I believe there were 7 or 8 that were found linked in various ways.
Yeah, the New York Times saying at least 7 or 8. The Washington Post says at least 11 out of the 15 that were linked closely to the Crown Prince. What else did you find working on that investigation?
Well, I had a tiny role, and the fact is that if you look at each one, you have to be able to find someone who's seen them in Paris and London and the United States. And what I really found was that it takes an enormous number of techniques in order to corroborate who everybody is. And I think the one other thing is that typically someone who knows a lot about autopsies and forensics doesn't go along on trips.
With a bone saw.
With a bone saw, right.
Yeah, again, there are these sort of gruesome details that come out every day. Some of them verified, others, well, none of them verified
for
the time being.
But I think the forensics, the fact that the doctor was there is verified.
And, you know, as we've seen from the New York Times, they've not been the only newspaper that has been working hard to corroborate things that have been coming out of the Turkish media. Like when we heard initially about those 15 people that touched down in Istanbul, then international news outlets didn't take long to be able to individually confirm themselves who those people were. So it's not true to say that none of this story has been corroborated so far. Some of that particularly gruesome evidence surrounding that audio file, we haven't heard that been released publicly yet, but specific parts of this story we do know are true, including that those 15 Saudis, who they were, and that they arrived at the embassy at that time.
The audio file, the Turkish foreign minister this Friday saying, quoted by the Turkish media saying, we didn't give the audio file to anybody, but he didn't deny that it existed, Paul Moreira.
Yeah, the only information we have is that he was actually taping in audio and sending from his e-watch some data to someone who was outside and taping it on the phone. It's something that you can sync your iWatch to. That's the information we get. I don't know if it's confirmed, but that's what.
Or it's a convenient cover for the fact that the Turks may have been bugging the Saudi consul.
Yeah,
it's a possibility too.
It's more like it if, in fact, any of the tapes exist. Nobody that we can verify with has actually heard any of these tapes.
That said, though, I do think given the specifics of the information that appears to be trickling out, you're right, we haven't heard any evidence to corroborate those tapes yet. But I think if this is an entire fallacy constructed by officials within Turkey, why would they give us that information in such a gruesome drip specific way?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that they do it to pressure the Saudis. They drip, and then they stop, and then they drip.
Well, I mean, as you were saying, he did disappear. He went into the embassy. He didn't come out, and that's quite established. And I while there may be quite a bit of manipulation going on by Turkey as to the timing of what they're saying, the Saudis haven't been spewing that it's an outrageous theory. Particularly, they've been very quiet and waiting.
Well, they started by saying it was patently false and just was defaming the Saudi nation and the prince and so on and so forth. Now they've backed off on that as more and more investigations are underway. But, as I think about this, I wonder how all this would have developed if his fiancée, if Jamal's fiancée, had not been waiting for him just outside the embassy. If he had said, listen, dear, I'm going to go to the consulate, not the embassy. I'm going to go to the consulate, and I'll meet you for dinner. And she had just been at a restaurant waiting for him. She wouldn't have been in the position where she said he never came out. I never saw him again.
And there has been a backlash to a certain degree so far. We've seen more and more CEOs pulling out of this Davos in the Desert summit that was supposed to take place next year, including French.
Yeah, Bruno Le Maire. Yeah. He said he wouldn't go. But still, I've been reading the reactions of Trump, and there's kind of a smear campaign against Khashoggi happening now in the United States, saying that in his youth he was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, that he even was an Islamist. He had known Osama bin Laden back in the 90s and all that. So it's quite strange that his memory is being dirtied even before they find his body.
Let's talk about that a second. The Washington Post on Thursday published the last column that Khashoggi was working on it. In it, he issued an impassioned call for a free press to inform an Arab world where censorship is stronger than ever. During the Cold War, he says, Radio Free Europe, which grew over the years into a critical institution, played an important role in fostering and sustaining the hope of freedom. Arabs need something similar. Now, there's two other things he said about that, Nadia Massi. One, that even in countries where the press is relatively free, like Tunisia, like Kuwait, they're more inward-looking, or in the case of Lebanon, they're being, which is what he called the crown and the jewel of free press in the region, they're being self-censored or censored a little bit by the overbearing presence of Hezbollah. And he talks about Qatar as the one channel that has the one international eye on international news in the region.
I think the idea that Qatar represents the only bastion of free TV media in the Middle East, I think, is slightly questionable. And he was somebody who, even though you're right that his opinions are being very tarnished in American press now, it is true that he's not somebody who's had a completely straightforward relationship either with Saudi Arabia or with the West. He worked, something we don't hear much about, but he worked as a spokesperson for the Saudi government at some point, both in Washington and in London. But he was also really part of this Washington elite. And that's perhaps why his story, gruesome and horrific as it is, has gained such extraordinary online traction. That's why we're talking about this today, is because he was a figure who was very well known among people who walk the corridors of power, who tweet to millions of people online. But I think when you talk about his that last column that he wrote, where he was talking about press freedom in the Middle East, what is more poignant, what is more ironic that the last column that he wrote was apparently around the issue that got him killed, which was his writing about how he thinks critical voices in the Middle East are under threat.
And that call for the free press from Khashoggi, a far cry from Donald Trump's praise at a campaign rally Thursday evening of a Montana congressman. His name is Greg Gianforte, who last year pleaded guilty to assaulting a reporter.
Any guy that can do a body slam, he's my kind. And we endorsed Greg very early. But I had heard that he body slammed a reporter. And he was way up. And he was way up. And I said, oh, this was like the day of the election or just before. And I said, oh, this is terrible. He's going to lose the election. Then I said, well, wait a minute. I know Montana pretty well. I think it might help him. And it did.
Now you hear the people cheering in the background. Is it all a bit of entertainment, or is this, should we take him literally, Donald Trump, when he says stuff like that?
I think it's both. That's what makes him not possible to discount, regardless of whether you dislike him or hate him or whatever else. It's a very he does it in a relatively light way, but he knows his crowd, and I think it's quite genuine.
And there is, again, another irony there, that while he is eventually Donald Trump now denouncing what he's seen as happening with Khashoggi, a journalist, you see that he's quite capable of mocking journalists within his own country. So that criteria of what constitutes attacks on the press is maybe something which Donald
endorsing violence against journalists.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I think the key to understanding Trump, at least in this kind of venue and those kinds of remarks, is his affinity, in fact, for wrestling. What is he talking about? He's talking about a body slam. What is a body slam? It's a maneuver in the fake wrestling world, the world wrestling entertainment world, which he has done. There is a famous tape of him in 2007 in the Battle of the Billionaires with Vince McMahon, the head of the World Wrestling Entertainment Organization, where he body slams Vince McMahon and then shaves his head. It's all theater. And you could say that the scariest thing about Trump's rallies is not Trump, it's his audience. But they're all kind of in on the joke. It's as if they're watching a wrestling match, of one of these live entertainment matches.
But it also starts to change the culture. So it becomes more and more permissible to say that about journalists. And journalists, as opposed to being at least to some considerable extent, looking for truth or something close to truth and cutting through all the debris that's out there, are suddenly people you can knock down. Is there
going to be a Khashoggi effect on the midterm elections? And if so, which direction?
I don't know. I mean,
doubt it.
I wrote a piece in today's Daily Beast pointing out the incredible hypocrisy of Trump, who ran against Muslims. I mean, a huge part of his campaign in 2016 was banning Muslims, keeping them out of the country, attacking Muslims all the time. And he also said he's opposed to Sharia. Sharia is creeping into the United States. Islamic law, it's a huge threat. This is a big issue in the United States, especially in the heartland. And yet he's totally in bed with the most radically conservative, imaginable Islamic regime, just because they got a lot of money and they put it into his pockets and to some extent into America's.
Exactly. And I mean, we should underscore more strongly the first soundbite we heard of Trump at the beginning of your show, where he was stating very clearly, I mean, the amount of money is America and the rest of the Western countries really are making out of Saudi Arabia. And you can foresee quite clearly that he's not going to push very strongly for retaliation against Saudi Arabia, because it's a real fountain of wealth for American business and arms trade.
Even if the story stays in the headlines. happens.
I don't think it won't.
Well, I just want to sort of raise something for the record, which is that it seems as if you look at the Washington Post sort of truth-telling material, that in fact Trump vastly inflated the amount of the Saudi deal. So he's talked about having made $110 billion. I think the actual amount of the signed contracts, and the Post did a great job of going and looking at the State Department contracts, was $4 billion.
But isn't that just typical Trump?
Yes, it may be typical Trump, but the fact is that then that raises the question, okay, so how much, what's the smallest amount of money that Trump is willing to let go for human rights? How do you balance those two?
Nothing. Trump, I think we can say without qualification, he doesn't give a damn about human rights. Yeah. He cares about monetary gain. That's it. Everything is transactional with him, and everything is about money. That's why he's constantly talking about money and jobs.
A little spoken about fact this week, which is on Thursday, the United States announcing that it was going to fill a 16-month vacancy at its embassy in Qatar, naming an ambassador there.
Well, the Qataris have a lot of money. I mean, they got a lot of money.
But the Qataris at loggerheads with the Saudis.
But we haven't actually appointed an ambassador to Saudi Arabia. So
nor, I believe, to Turkey.
Nor to Turkey.
Right.
So, okay, thank you for doing this with Qatar. That's a good idea. And I can see that would be a bit of an issue with Saudi Arabia. But Qatar's got a huge amount of money. We also have an enormous military base in Qatar. I'm sure that General Mattis, among others, said to Trump, you know what, we really need a little representation there.
I wonder if we can just briefly go back to Donald Trump's what he's saying now. He's going, if this is proven on Khashoggi, that there'll be a very severe response. I wonder, are we really looking at a fundamental reshaping of the US relationship with Saudi Arabia? Personally, I find it pretty unlikely indeed. Perhaps some of that money, those financial deals have been a little inflated, but they remain intimately tied on all kinds of other issues. That great enemy that is Iran isn't going anywhere. And I don't know, all that talk of strong reaction, what's it really going to look like?
Severe, he said. It would be a severe reaction.
Our head's going to roll. We're hearing now.
Don't use that.
You're right. Perhaps a crass phrase, but I was reading perhaps in the New York Times today that there are reports that the Major General Ahmed al-Asiri is going to have to take the fall for this case, a senior person in Saudi Arabia, to kind of take responsibility to show that something's happening. Will that be enough? Is that going to assuage the public anger?
Well, I can sense the skepticism on our set here in Paris. We'll see how it plays out. When we come back, we're going to be taking a look at that very continental soap opera here called Brexit. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Christopher Dickey is foreign editor. Welcome back as well to Elisa Rubin, Paris bureau chief for the New York Times, documentary filmmaker Paul Moreira, the director of Première Ligne, the television press agency, and France 24's Nadia Massi. The World This Week, where we've been taking a look a lot at Brexit. Now, if you thought the ordeal of protracted negotiations was nearly over, you might want to think again.
Further idea that has emerged, and it is an idea at this stage, is to create an option to extend the implementation period for a matter of months, and it would only be for a matter of months.
Only going to be for a matter of months. The UK Prime Minister speaking at the tail end of what was supposed to be a deal-making summit in Brussels. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. It's not looking like it's going to happen in November, maybe December. Nadia Massi, the sources tell us that on both sides of the channel, we want to be put out of our misery when it comes to these negotiations.
Maybe we all want to be put out of our misery, journalists and politicians alike, but as you alluded to, I don't think that we will be. There was supposed to be this summit in November that was supposed to tie up what this deal was going to look like. We heard earlier on this week they've not made enough progress on that crucial issue over the Irish border and the backstop, which means there's going to be no big summit in November, which means we're looking at December now, 3 months before Britain leaves the European Union. That has been seen as kind of the final point to try and get a deal on paper to sort out that particularly tricky problem around where to put the Irish border, if not in the Irish Sea, then between Northern Ireland and the Republic, something which is untenable really for everybody. It looks like an unsquareable circle for now. So all eyes really on December. Can we get a deal?
Earlier this week, Paul Moreira, I was listening to French radio in the morning, and they were explaining an expression from baseball terminology, what the word backstop means to French audiences, because it's the bit, by the way, behind the batting cage, because of this issue of what if there's no deal, what do you do about Ireland?
Well, I think one of the reasons why the idea of Europe is precious, it's because it has this federalist mood attached to it, and I think it has a little bit brought peace in areas where there was strong national claims, like in Pays Basque, in Spain,
the Basque Country,
right, and somehow in Ireland too. If Sinn Féin renounced to armed struggle, it's a lot because Europe has kind of diluted this nationalistic frame that was also the quorum for the fight of the Irish against the British. And I think that if the border is reinstated, I can foresee that it will reignite. It may reignite again the Irish feeling that again they are stuck with the Brits, and they are unhappy with it, and so it's like the hidden surprise that may be within this new.
France 24's correspondent went to the border on Wednesday, and the locals there told him that if you put up barriers here, if you put up watchtowers, which are forbidden under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement of 1998, people will see that as an act of aggression.
Of course they will. Of course they will, and that's why it's become such a difficult issue. But if I may, Francois, I don't think the Brexit crisis is nearly as big as the crisis we see looming in Italy right now, where the Italians put in a budget to the European Commission that the Commission cannot even begin to accept. And they're going to use this to challenge the legitimacy of the Commission itself. Salvini, who will be the next Prime Minister of Italy, almost certainly, very far right, very good friend of Steve Bannon, who wants to tear the European Union apart. All that is going on, and I don't think people are paying enough attention. I think
are you saying
we're
it's a
wasting
bigger
a lot of time
crisis
on
for
Brexit.
Europe than
Yes,
Brexit?
absolutely. It's in the heart of the Eurozone. It's much more important in many ways than Great Britain is.
Lisa Rubin, you agree?
I certainly think that there will be at some point a negotiated solution for Brexit, and at the moment, Italy is what I think the third outside of Britain, France, Germany. It's the next biggest economy, and if it were to leave the Eurozone or to not pay or not accept all the rules, that's quite serious. It's much more serious.
And the goal is to destroy the European Union. The goal of Brexit was not to destroy the European Union; it was to get out of it. The goal of Salvini, just like Le Pen here in France, is to destroy it.
And that may be why the EU has not moved at all on any of its red lines on Brexit, because it simply doesn't want to encourage any other countries in the European Union to think about pulling out, whether that's Italy or indeed in some kind of alarming future, France under Marine Le Pen.
Let's visit what Christopher's saying there. While the summit's taking place in Brussels on Wednesday and Thursday, you saw the European Commissioner in charge of finance travel to Rome, telling the economy minister, Giovanni Tria, that with its current debt burden, the new populist coalition there just simply can't up the spending in its budget and lower the pension age. Now, the Austrian Chancellor, he holds the rotating presidency of the EU, may like Salvini and Italy's tough line on immigration, but as a fellow member of the Eurozone, one that has a budget surplus, this is where the Italians and the Austrians part ways.
I believe that at the latest, after Greece, everyone should know that over-indebtedness is dangerous for the country itself, as well as for the entire Eurozone. At the end of the day, society's weakest are always those most affected.
Paul, is this really a bigger crisis than Brexit for the European Union?
Well, we are at the beginning of it. So if the the worst scenario would be for Italy to leave euro, to break away from euro, and it's something that has been spoken about repeatedly, and it could be an option, and that probably will mean the collapse of the euro system, and with some consequences that I'm not capable of foresee, but probably very dangerous.
All right, Matteo Salvini is not the only one, by the way, who likes social media. It got pretty shouty on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube as France's far-left leader live-streamed this week the police raid on his political headquarters as part of an illicit campaign funding probe. Now, to hear the 67-year-old tell it, Jean-Luc Mélenchon is not just any politician.
Me touchez pas, monsieur, vous n'avez pas le droit de me toucher. Ça, c'est le procureur qui dit que je sais pas quoi. Personne ne me touche. Ma personne est sacrée, je suis parlementaire. Et pour vous en convaincre, et que vous terminiez de bien comprendre qui je suis, mets-moi ça. Voilà. C'est moi, Mélenchon, avec mon écharpe tricolore. Je n'ai peur de personne.
How did you report that one to your readers?
Well, we're waiting to see if he's charged.
Oh, right.
What actually?
Because he might be charged not just for the illicit campaign financing, but for actually pushing that magistrate and the gendarme.
Yes. Yeah. I have been surprised that no one has made the analogy actually to Donald Trump and this idea of being sort of above the law almost, and not needing to play by the same rules as citizens.
Well, I think you should make that, actually.
If the New York Times says it, must be true.
Paul Moreira, what do French people make of this?
Well, according to a poll that was made recently, Mélenchon is really ahead of many politicians, meaning that he embodies something that is deeply ingrained into French culture of resistance and yelling back at authority and all that. So I understand that for you guys, it's probably very shocking to see a politician reacting like that to police and to the authority. For French, not that much. I personally think that he has lost it. I mean, the beginning of it was kind of funny because he was showing his nice apartment, by the way, he's showing his place and all that, and it was interesting. So that for the public to have access to this,
but even for the French,
moment.
A politician who says, "I am the Republic," how does that?
He lost it. I mean, he got totally overwhelmed by his emotions. He's totally out of pace, and I think what was grave was for him to push the procureur, and he's going to get problems for that, obviously.
All right. The many wondering if we're going to cross the Atlantic, if it's high time that people followed or nations followed the example of the country of the maple leaf. On Wednesday at 10 a.m. local time, Canada becoming the first industrialized nation to legalize recreational marijuana, a move some criminologists compare to the end of prohibition for alcohol in the United States in the 1930s. As for consumers, well,
I never thought this day was going to happen where we could have legal recreational cannabis in Canada, let alone Quebec, and it's happened. We did it today.
I'm so excited. I don't think I've ever been as excited for anything else in my life as I am tonight.
This is like the end of prohibition for alcohol, pretty much for cannabis, right? So it's just something that you want to be able to tell your kids that you were there for this moment.
Lisa Rubin.
If you can remember.
So fall of the Berlin Wall.
Well, it's become a very big business, and I think there are major companies here in France as well that are looking at where they can get into it. There are individual states in the United States where it's become much more available, not just for medical reasons, and I think we'll see this continuing, but in part because it is lucrative. The harder part is that just as there are problems with alcohol.
So you're saying this wave of legalization is for economic reasons?
I think that hasn't hurt. Yeah, I think it makes it easier because it's not just that people are going to smoke it. Lots of people had to vote on it who will never smoke it.
Well, it's going to be a source of revenue, obviously, for the government. I mean, it's
being
just
taxed.
It's like alcohol. Once you legalize it, you can tax it.
Right.
As long Canada, it's not it hasn't been impossible to get dope in Canada. It's been very easy for a very long time, but it wasn't taxed. It was like a little bit like in the Netherlands. It was these sort of informal coffee shops.
Yeah, it's tolerated but illegal.
Tolerated but illegal, and the police would try and differentiate between the real mafias and just the sort of local sellers, all of which was crazy because, among other things, the government made zero money out of that. Now the government, I think Alyssa's exactly right, the government can make a lot of money out of this.
And it was earlier on this year that Uruguay became the first country in the world to completely legalize cannabis. And you've seen there that the government has, one of the reasons they said, as well as trafficking, which is not so much a problem in Canada, but they said it's because they wanted to tax the revenues from it. It's been pretty successful in the last 2 or 3 months in Uruguay. Not out of the question that will be in Canada.
Is this really
too.
just about money, Paul Moreira?
No, I think it's a society. I mean, people have been smoking weed for the last 50 years, and I think it's just about time that, take it into account that it's a reality. I think in France, if it happens one day, it will have a paradoxical effect on the suburbs, in the ghettos. It's very strange, but for that you have 40% unemployment, and there's a real economy. There's an enormous amount of youngsters that make a living out of selling weed. And I just wonder what's going to happen once this becomes controlled by the state and they lose this economy.
Well, I think we'll have to see, because one of the things in regulating it is they have forced lower levels of THC, which is what gives you the buzz in the with weed. And if you do that, you still kind of leave a market for the sort of full strength. I think that they're looking at that being something that they see in Canada. I mean, I think in a way it will be the first test case of this idea that it's better to have legal drugs that are mind-altering than it is to have them illegal.
But it's I mean, I read reports this week that said there'll always be contraband. There'll always be things that will be sold on the black market regarding. You were saying that this cottage industry that takes place in working class suburbs in France.
Yeah, but when you go like in the U.S., in California, I visited a place that sells weed legally, and it's really like a wine shop. You have this type, like 25 types of weed, and I can foresee, really imagine that it could happen in France. The thing is, so far, I mean, if you don't get jobs to those guys in the inner cities, you're going to have problems. So they're going to go into MDMA, or they're going to go into selling cocaine or heroin, but a new product is going to come up.
One of our producers in the newsroom is Canadian. She was saying...
I thought you were going to say they're stoned.
Oh, no. At least she was saying that the reason why it's a good idea to have legalized marijuana in Canada is because minorities were too often being discriminated against and targeted for prosecution.
Well, listen, that's a terrible problem in the United States. In New York City, for instance, there are a huge number of arrests of young minority people, usually black kids, who were stopped on the street, and the cops said, empty your pockets. And if they had any dope in their pockets, any weed in their pockets, they got nailed. And they now had a police record, and they were headed down the road to a lot of trouble in their lives just for having a little dope. So there's now efforts to overturn that. I think they're not doing that in New York anymore, but it's a real problem.
Yeah,
but sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh no, they're in Canada. I think they're talking about pardoning people who are in jail for small quantities, and possibly taking that off people's records.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to bounce off a bit that question of the way that this is policed racially. I know that in the UK and in the United States, the cocaine is used far more than cannabis by white people, and it's not policed anywhere near the same. So you can definitely see, I'm sure still in the United States, I know in the UK that the racial politics of that certainly hasn't gone away, despite piecemeal attempts that are being made in Canada and in the United States.
And do you see this, Nadi, becoming a global phenomenon? That's it. The wave has happened. It's going to happen around the world. I'm thinking of a country, Lebanon, which is a exporter of hashish. Will there be legalization one day there?
Well, we only have now a couple of months of Uruguay, and less than a week of Canada. So I'm not sure we're about to see the entire world move in that way. I mean, when it comes to Lebanon, it has the cannabis industry has a really important role in the black market there, and I don't think that many people there are actually very hesitant about making it legal. They think that it would destroy lots of people's jobs in the country. It's not something that I think is
so what's
happening
more
imminently at all.
If we're going to employ Elisa Rubin economic logic here, what's more in the interest of decision makers there? Is it to make it legal or keep it illegal?
Well, I think that the part of the country that hosts most of those hashish fields is the Bekaa, is the Hezbollah territories next to the Syrian border, and it remains very much in their interest to keep it illegal for now, so that they can continue to profit off the smuggling of drugs. And we've seen now the dysfunction in the Lebanese non-government means that there really is very little capacity to pressure those industries to do anything about it, even if they wanted to. It brings in a lot of money to Lebanon. I don't think this is the beginning of a slippery slope towards legalization elsewhere in the world, but bring me back in a year's time and prove me wrong. Let's see.
Homer, your prediction on this? Do you see?
No, I see it as a major trend. Like I was thinking about Portugal, a tiny European country where it's not legal, but you can have any drugs, not only weed, but cocaine, heroin, any drugs. They don't send you to jail anymore, and they don't like prosecute you anymore. And it has been like that for, I think, the last 10 years. And on the overall, it has been positive in the Portuguese society. I mean, they have been able to develop programs for addicts, and it has been better than sending people to jail and to have an apparatus of fighting, drug dealing and all that. So I believe that we will walk towards this more
decriminalization.
Right, exactly.
All right. We'll leave it there for now. I want to thank you so much, Paul Moreira, Elisa Rubin, Nadia Massi, Christopher Dickey. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
Emma, the panel was a little brutal on that French far-left leader, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. You're back for another helping of...
A little bit. Well, he's had a busy week, really living up to his party's name, La France Insoumise, Unsubmissive France.
Unbowed is how he lives.
I know. I think unsubmissive fits a little better today. It does have various different translations. It never quite works in English. But yes, having grandly declared himself to be the Republic, as you were saying earlier, he certainly wasn't speaking for all of France when he chose to mock a journalist because she had a Toulouse accent. Take a look at this clip.
Et alors, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? Non, mais... Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? C'est quoi votre question, madame? Je ne comprends pas ce que vous dites. Non, non, madame, vous ne savez pas de quoi vous parlez. Non, vous dites n'importe quoi. Quelqu'un a-t-il une question formulée en français et à peu près compréhensible? Parce que moi, à votre niveau...
I guess he lost the Toulouse vote there.
Definitely. Yes, he imitated her, really exaggerating those sort of
he's
different
a member
endings.
of Parliament from Marseille.
That's what a lot of people are pointing out.
A southern accent.
Yes, exactly. Just because Toulouse is southwest, the southeast isn't that different. It may be slightly different, but certainly a lot of people pointing out, hang on a minute, if you're representing the south of France in Parliament, surely this is more than a little inappropriate. Lots of people taking to Twitter, including this journalist, who said that he suspects the problem was more about the fact that he didn't like the question rather than her accent, and he was just kind of deflecting attention away from what she was asking him. This gentleman saying that he should get out, pick up your stuff and get out of there. What a shame you are so arrogant, and you made Marseille your fiefdom, your territory, because he's not a sort of a Marseillais. He wasn't born there. He has no real links other than he is now the MP there. So a lot of people very unhappy about the way that this has played out. This gentleman saying, I'm very bad at geography, but wasn't he elected in Marseille? Proof once again of his contempt for the citizens who voted for him. So a lot of people very unhappy. LCI pointing out that, no offence, Mélenchon, but they say that the southwest was actually deemed to be the most sexy accent in the whole of France. Now, They did have to go rummaging around back in 2013 to find this particular poll. But I have to say, I have quite a penchant for the Southwest accent. I think it's rather nice. Some people, though, are seizing the political initiative with this one. Right. The hashtag glottophobia has been trending all day. It is something that has everybody talking. And a French MP has actually tabled a bill to outlaw glottophobia, or discrimination against regional accents. We don't really have quite the right word in English, it has to be said.
And you've been living here long enough. Compared to the UK, because I know when I go to the UK, people are very attuned to the accents.
Oh, yes. I mean, the accents across the UK vary hugely. I'm from the southeast. If I go to the north of England, I have as much trouble understanding people as perhaps many French people do when they travel to the UK. So there are huge differences. And I think the differences in France are perhaps a little more subtle. Yes, you have that sort of différence, as they like to say in Toulouse in the southwest. But certainly, yes, there are differences. Now, the MP that's pushing for this is Laetitia Avia, who is a member of Emmanuel Macron's République on the Move party. And what she says is, do we speak French any the less with an accent? Must we suffer humiliation if we don't speak standard French? Because our accents are our identity. I'm tabling a bill to recognise glottophobia as a source of discrimination. And she says it's something she's experienced herself. As a girl from the banlieue, she was brought up in Seine-Saint-Denis, and she said when she went to Sciences Po, a very posh, high sort of university here in France, she realised she had to change how she spoke, and she thinks that that is wrong. Now, Mélenchon has done his best to diffuse the row, sort of. The Huffington Post calling it an apology, I think that's a little generous, to be fair, because it's a very combative statement that he made, and what he said is, I thought she was mocking me.
Ah. I thought she was mocking me. Another story you're following, I don't know if it's equally
very
important.
Very important.
Is a French artist who has turned her mourning and loss for a pet cat into an artistic project.
And it is quite a project, it has to be said. It's very impressive stuff. Souris Cal is the cat in question. The artist is Sophie Cal, who lives in Paris. There is Souris. They shared their lives for 17 years, which is longer than many marriages, it has to be said. He actually died 4 years ago, this cat. It's taken her this long to come up with a whole kind of conceptual art movement almost. There's an exhibition and running alongside it is an art project. Now, an album's actually been released with lots of really big names involved. Pharrell Williams, he of Happy and the like, Jarvis Cocker, Jean-Michel Jarre for the French fans, Michael Stipe of R.E.M., Bono, too, got involved in this one. And I think that's probably one of my favourites. He reads a poem. I think I should be able to play you a little bit of this.
Will be absorbed and utterly disappear. Just as a raving madman, when nothing else can ease him, charges into his dark night howling, pounds on the padded wall and
it's pretty incredible stuff. And it's interesting as well that these artists have really taken the idea of conceptual art and run with it. And here in France as well, it's become something of a talking point. France Inter inviting artists in to re-record different versions of the songs. This one of my favourites. And it's certainly very French. Now, there's an exhibition at the Peritain Galleries, which runs until the 22nd of December. And although it is kind of fun, you know, the music's all very serious. And she says that it's about getting people to stop frowning on the loss of pets and viewing it as something unimportant. She says we grieve as much for the pets we share our lives with as we do the humans.
Where's the body of the cat? I mean, is that part of the conceptual art?
No, it's not one of those Damien Hirst things. I think that was, but I think that was before it was buried.
Oh.
It's not one of those grisly exhibitions.
Okay.
Okay, we'll leave it there. I want to thank you, Emma James. I want to thank our panel once again. I want to thank cat and dog lovers for joining us. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.